In a quiet village surrounded by endless fields, a child was born, and his arrival filled the small mud house with joy, yet fate had already written a difficult test for him, because only a few days after his birth his father passed away, leaving his mother alone, with a newborn in her arms, and a storm of responsibilities on her shoulders. She was a simple village woman who had never seen comfort in life, but the strength of her heart was greater than the burdens she carried. She raised her son with endless patience and silent tears, hiding her pain while giving him courage to face the harsh world around him. Poverty had always wrapped their home like a never-ending night. His mother worked in the fields under the burning sun during the day and returned home in the evening exhausted, but her eyes always carried a glimmer of hope that one day her son would rise above these struggles and change his destiny. The villagers often whispered that this boy would never survive such misery, that children born without a father in such conditions rarely grew into anything but laborers. Yet his mother believed differently. She always told him, hardships make a man strong, and patience turns weakness into power. From his earliest days, the boy understood sacrifice. When other children played games, he ran errands to earn a few coins for food, sometimes cutting firewood to sell, sometimes carrying loads in the market, and sometimes working in the fields beside tired laborers. But unlike others, he never allowed exhaustion to break his will. In the evenings, when the village echoed with the laughter of children at play, he sat under the dim glow of a small lamp reading torn books his mother had somehow managed to collect. There were nights when the oil in the lamp finished and darkness swallowed the room, yet he continued his lessons in the faint light of the moon or near the flames of burning wood. He knew deep inside that education was his only way out of misery, his only chance to rise beyond the walls of poverty. Every page he read felt like a step towards freedom. Every word he memorized carried him closer to the dream that one day he would become more than just a poor boy working for scraps. He often imagined building things that could bring change to his village, a machine to ease the farmer's burden, a light that could drive away the nights, darkness, and a future where no child would go hungry. His heart carried dreams far bigger than his circumstances, and though the world doubted him, he silently promised himself and his mother that he would not let life defeat him. He would climb higher than the clouds, reach farther than the horizon, and prove that even a child born in the shadow of loss and poverty could dream higher than the sky. As the years passed, the boy grew older, and with every passing season, the weight of responsibility grew heavier on his small shoulders. Yet his spirit never bent under the pressure. Life in the village was not kind to him. While other children enjoyed simple joys of youth, he was forced to face struggles that demanded maturity far beyond his age. Each morning, he would wake before sunrise, helping his mother with chores before setting out to work in the fields or carrying loads in the market for a few coins. His hands grew rough, his back ached from labor, and yet his heart burned with the fire of ambition. When his friends mocked him for always studying instead of playing, he remained silent, but inside, he nurtured a dream so strong that no ridicule could extinguish it. His teachers at the village school noticed his brilliance for while he had no proper books or supplies. He would memorize every lesson carefully and ask questions that revealed the depth of his curiosity. He became known as the boy with endless hunger for knowledge, and soon even the elders of the village began to whisper that perhaps he was not ordinary. Nights were the hardest for him when fatigue weighed down his body, yet he forced himself to sit under the dim lamp, reciting lessons until his eyes could no longer stay open. His mother often begged him to rest, but he only smiled and said, "One day, my dreams will take us beyond these walls." His determination inspired her to work harder herself, knowing that her son carried the strength of two souls within him. There were moments when despair crept in, especially when the harvests failed, or when money ran out, for even the smallest needs. But the boy always found a way to turn pain into strength. Sometimes he worked extra hours. Sometimes he borrowed books from distant schools, walking miles to return them, but never once did he allow the chains of poverty to break his path. The villagers began to see a change in him, a quiet confidence that seemed unshakable. And though many still doubted his future, he had already made up his mind. He would not remain confined to the fate that life had handed him. He would rise above it all. He started dreaming not just of education, but of becoming a scientist, someone who could bring light to his village, someone who could turn dreams into inventions and hopes into reality. And so each day, he carried both the burden of survival and the burning flame of knowledge, never letting either destroy the other, but instead weaving them into a journey that pushed him closer to the sky. The boy's journey into youth was filled with even greater trials, yet his resolve only grew stronger as the world tested him. Again and again, he had now completed his basic education in the village, but to pursue higher studies, he needed to move to the city, and that decision was not easy for his mother, who had raised him alone. With every sacrifice she could give, she feared the cruelty of the world outside the village. But at the same time, she knew that her son's dreams were too vast to be caged within narrow boundaries. With tears in her eyes, she gave him her blessings and a small bundle of food as he set out on the dusty road to the city, carrying nothing but determination and a few worn-out books. Life in the city was harsher than he had imagined. He found himself surrounded by towering buildings, bright lights, and countless faces. But for someone who had lived his entire life in a small village, the noise and chaos felt overwhelming. He worked odd jobs, sweeping floors, serving tea, carrying loads in markets, anything that would allow him to pay for his books and his schooling. Many nights he slept hungry on the floor of a cramped rented room, yet each morning he woke with renewed strength, reminding himself that every hardship was only a step toward the sky. His classmates mocked his simple clothes and rural accent, but his brilliance in studies silenced them in examinations where he always stood first. Teachers praised his sharp mind and often wondered how a boy from such difficult circumstances could shine so brightly, but he never allowed pride to take root. Instead, he remembered his mother's words that humility keeps knowledge alive and arrogance destroys it. Whenever he returned to the village for short visits, he carried with him not only stories of the city but also hope for the children who looked up to him as proof that dreams could break through walls of poverty. His mother would listen proudly as he shared his progress, though she hid her worries about his health and exhaustion. Behind every smile he carried the weight of her sacrifices and the memory of his late father, whom he never truly knew, but always imagined would be proud of him. In the silence of his small room at night, he would often whisper to himself, "I will not stop until I make something that changes the lives of people who live in darkness." He studied science with passion, experimenting with small tools, collecting discarded wires and broken machines from scrap markets, turning them into small inventions that amazed his peers. Slowly, he began to realize that his path was not just about escaping poverty, but about becoming a light for others, a guiding star for his village, and perhaps for the world. His journey was only beginning, and though the road ahead was uncertain, his dreams had grown higher and stronger, unshaken by storms. The young man's life in the city continued to unfold with new challenges, and with every passing year the demands of his studies grew heavier, yet so did his determination. He often found himself standing at the edge of despair when the weight of hunger, fatigue, and endless responsibilities seemed impossible to bear, but something inside him never allowed him to surrender. Each morning he would attend classes with full focus, and at night he would work tirelessly to earn the money needed to survive. Sometimes he washed dishes in small tea shops, sometimes he carried heavy sacks in warehouses, and sometimes he sold old newspapers on street corners. Yet, no matter how difficult the day had been, he always returned to his books as if they were his true treasure. The city was full of distractions and temptations, but he had no time for them. He carried within him a fire that was brighter than the lights of the city, a fire that came from the silent prayers of his mother and from the memory of his father, whom he believed was watching him from above. His teachers began to notice not only his brilliance, but also his discipline and self-control, and soon he became known among them as the boy who could not be broken. He spent hours in the science laboratory, conducting small experiments, often using discarded materials that others threw away, because he believed that even the smallest things had the power to create change. Many of his classmates grew curious, and some even began to respect him, though there were still those who mocked his humble origins. But he no longer paid attention to their words, for he knew that his journey was not meant to please people. It was meant to fulfill a dream that reached beyond the sky. There were days when he collapsed from exhaustion, waking up on the floor with his book still open beside him, and there were nights when his stomach ached with hunger. Yet in those moments he remembered his mother's tired face and her unshakable belief in him, and it gave him strength to rise again. Whenever he managed to save a little money, he sent it back to his village to ease his mother's burdens, and this act of love became his greatest source of motivation. He often visited her during short breaks, and every time he saw the pride in her eyes, he felt a renewed energy to keep moving forward. Though he carefully hid from her the extent of his struggles in the city, because he wanted her heart to carry only hope and not fear in his heart, he began to feel that his destiny was not only to achieve greatness for himself, but to lift the lives of many others around him. The boy who once studied under the dim light of a flickering lamp now dreamed of creating light for countless homes, and the boy who once worked in fields now imagined building machines that could ease the burdens of farmers. The path was long and uncertain, but he walked it with unwavering steps, for he had already decided that nothing would stop him until he turned his dreams into reality. Years passed in the city, and the boy slowly transformed into a young man whose name began to spread within his college as a symbol of persistence and brilliance. His professors admired his hunger for knowledge and often gave him opportunities to work on projects that were beyond the reach of ordinary students. He seized every chance with gratitude and determination, spending long nights in the laboratory and countless days in libraries surrounded by books that fed his restless curiosity. His experiments were often simple, made from recycled wires, broken motors, and discarded batteries, yet behind each one was a mind that refused to accept limits. He created small devices that amazed both his teachers and his peers. Sometimes a tiny machine that could lift more weight than expected, sometimes a light that burned longer with less fuel. These small successes were sparks that fueled his larger dreams, but they were also reminders of how far he still had to go. Survival was never easy, as hunger and exhaustion continued to test him, but each obstacle only deepened his resolve. He had learned to balance between two lives, one of a laborer struggling to earn coins to pay for food and rent, and the other of a student determined to reach the stars. At times his body trembled from fatigue, and his vision blurred from lack of rest, yet his heart whispered that giving up was never an option. His mother's letters arrived every few weeks, written in simple words, full of love and prayers, and they became his greatest source of comfort. He could almost hear her voice in those lines, reminding him that his sacrifices would one day light up the world around him. Many students gave in to despair or distraction. Some left their studies midway to seek easier paths, but he chose to endure because he had already promised himself and his mother that he would rise higher than the sky. His achievements began to attract the attention of local scholars who invited him to present his work at small exhibitions, and though he often felt nervous standing before large audiences, the applause he received strengthened his confidence. He realized that his ideas could inspire others and that his struggle was not only personal but also a message for anyone who dared to dream in the face of adversity. When he returned to his village, during breaks, children gathered around him with asking questions about the city and his inventions, and he patiently explained to them that knowledge was the true power that could change their lives. His mother looked at him with tears of pride in her eyes, and though her hands were still rough from years of labor, her heart felt lighter because she knew her son was walking the path she had once prayed for. The young man began to see his purpose more clearly. He was no longer just chasing success for himself, he was preparing to become a source of light for those who still lived in darkness, and every step he took carried him closer to fulfilling the dream that was larger than his own life. The young man's reputation continued to grow as his hard work and inventions caught the attention of people beyond his college, and soon he was offered opportunities to participate in larger competitions where students from different parts of the country presented their ideas for him. These were not just contests, but stepping stones towards the life he had always imagined. He worked day and night on his projects, often skipping meals and sleep just to perfect every detail. His dedication amazed his professors, who began to see in him not only a brilliant student, but also a future scientist whose work could bring real change. His inventions were still small, yet they reflected a vision that was far greater than the resources in his hands. At one exhibition, he presented a device that generated light from minimal energy, and though it was crude compared to advanced technology, it was innovative enough to earn him recognition and a scholarship that helped reduce the financial burden he carried. This scholarship became a turning point for him because, for the first time, he felt the weight of survival slightly lifted, and it allowed him to focus more deeply on his education. Still, he did not forget the struggles that had shaped him, and he continued to work jobs during evenings, sending a part of his earnings back to his mother, who remained his strongest support. In her letters, she reminded him never to lose humility and always to remember his roots, and he carried those words like a guiding star through his persistence. He began to connect with mentors in the scientific community who encouraged him to think beyond simple projects and aim for solutions that could transform entire communities. This guidance fueled his determination further, and he started to dream of building systems that could bring electricity to rural villages and tools that could make farming easier for poor families. Yet despite these growing ambitions, he remained deeply aware of his limitations, and each day was still a battle between exhaustion and willpower. There were moments when his health declined from overwork, and nights when loneliness pressed heavily on his heart, but he fought through every weakness with the memory of his mother's sacrifices and the promise he had made to himself. He believed that pain was temporary, but the impact of his work could be eternal. His classmates, who once mocked him, now looked to him for help and guidance, and slowly he began to inspire others. With his story, his journey was no longer just about climbing out of poverty. It was about lifting others with him and showing them that dreams were not bound by circumstances. The boy who had once studied under the dim light of a broken lamp was now building devices that could light up hundreds of lamps, and though the path ahead was still long and uncertain, he had already proven to himself that nothing could stop him from reaching higher than the sky. As the young man's work gained more recognition, he found himself invited to academic gatherings and research groups where great minds discussed solutions for the future, and though he often felt out of place among students who came from wealthy families with every resource available, he refused to let self-doubt weaken him. He reminded himself that his journey had never been about privilege but about perseverance, and that was his greatest strength. He listened carefully during these sessions, asked thoughtful questions, and absorbed knowledge with a hunger that impressed even the most experienced professors. His ability to think differently soon began to shine through when he suggested ideas that no one else considered, because his mind was shaped not by luxury but by necessity. He had grown up solving problems with whatever little he had, and this made his creativity unique. His projects slowly evolved from small experiments to meaningful designs, one aimed at producing affordable electricity for villages using simple natural resources, and another focused on building low-cost farming tools that could reduce the physical burden of poor farmers. The more he worked, the more he realized that his dream was not only to succeed personally, but to become the voice of those who had no chance to be heard. Despite his growing success, life continued to test him with hardships. His health often suffered from long hours, his finances were always on the edge, and at times, he felt the loneliness of carrying dreams too heavy for his young shoulders. But whenever despair approached, he thought of his mother's tired hands and her unwavering faith in him, and he rose again stronger than before. His story began to spread across the campus, and many students started approaching him not only to learn about science, but also to learn about resilience. He became a symbol of hope, proving that greatness could be born even from the darkest corners of poverty. Teachers admired him, students respected him, and his mother's prayers seemed to follow him everywhere. Still, he did not allow praise to blind him. He reminded himself daily that knowledge without humility was useless, and dreams without purpose were empty. He continued sending money home, and during each visit to his village, he felt an unexplainable peace. When children ran around him asking about his inventions, and elders blessed him with words of pride, those moments reminded him that his journey had meaning beyond his own life. He was carrying not just his own hopes, but the hopes of an entire community. The boy, who had once struggled to afford even a candle, now dreamed of building a future where no child would ever struggle to find light. His purpose grew stronger and his resolve sharper, because he knew the road ahead was leading him closer to becoming the man who would turn impossible dreams into reality. The young man had now reached a stage where his ideas were not just experiments in a laboratory, but solutions that drew the attention of organizations and researchers beyond his college. And this new recognition opened doors he had once thought impossible. Yet along with opportunity came heavier responsibilities. He was asked to present his work before panels of experts, where each question tested not only his knowledge, but also his confidence. And though his heart raced each time he stood before them, he reminded himself of the nights when he studied under the weak glow of a lamp in his village, and that memory gave him courage to speak with clarity. His proposals were simple but powerful ways to generate energy from resources available even in the poorest villages, machines designed with the idea that technology should serve those who needed it the most. His words carried sincerity because they came from lived experience, and soon he began to win support from people who believed in his vision. With small grants, he was able to build prototypes that showed promise, and though many of them were rough and imperfect, they proved the possibility of change. This progress brought him joy, but also reminded him that he could not slow down, because each step forward was connected to the sacrifices his mother had made and to the silent prayers of those who still lived in darkness. There were times when jealousy and competition from others created obstacles. Some tried to discourage him, some mocked his background, but he faced them with quiet strength, for he knew his purpose was far greater than their doubts. His health continued to be fragile and sleepless. Nights often left him weak, but he refused to let his body dictate the pace of his dreams. Instead, he pushed forward, believing that true strength was not the absence of struggle but the ability to endure through it. Whenever he visited his village, he shared his progress with his mother, who listened with pride and tears, knowing her son was no longer just chasing education, he was building a future for many. She blessed him and reminded him to keep his heart pure because success without goodness had no value. And he promised her that, no matter how far he went, he would never forget his roots. His journey inspired the children of the village, who now studied with hope that they too could rise beyond their circumstances. And even the elders began to believe that the world outside was not unreachable. The boy who had once been doubted by everyone was now carrying the possibility of changing lives, and though the road ahead was still long and filled with uncertainty, he was steadily walking toward the destiny he had always dreamed of, a destiny higher than the sky. With each passing year, the young man's journey reached new heights, yet with every achievement, he carried an even deeper sense of responsibility because he understood that his work was no longer about himself alone, but about the countless lives that waited for change. His inventions began to gain recognition at national levels, and he was invited to present them in conferences where scholars and scientists from across the country gathered. He stood before them in modest clothes, his voice calm but filled with conviction, and when he spoke of villages without light, of farmers breaking their backs, and fields of children struggling to study without books or electricity, his words carried a truth that no statistics could deny. His devices were not perfect polished machines, but they represented hope and practicality, and the audience could feel the sincerity behind his ideas. Some applauded him, others challenged him with questions, yet he faced both with humility, knowing that progress was born through dialogue and struggle. The recognition he earned brought new opportunities, and with them came funding that allowed him to expand his projects into larger prototypes. He began building systems that could light up homes at lower costs and machines that saved time for farmers. But while the world celebrated his rising success, he remained grounded, remembering every night spent hungry and every coin earned with sweat. He continued sending money home, and in every letter his mother reminded him to never forget compassion, because real greatness was not measured by awards or titles, but by the lives touched along the way. He kept her words close to his heart, and whenever pride threatened to rise, he reminded himself that he was still the boy who once studied under moonlight in a quiet village. His story began to appear in newspapers, and soon he became a symbol of inspiration for youth who felt trapped in poverty. People wrote to him asking for advice, and many young students followed his example, working harder with the belief that dreams could overcome hardship. Despite the growing admiration, he still lived simply and spent most of his time in labs, libraries, and quiet reflection because he knew the journey was far from over. He dreamed not of becoming famous, but of building a legacy that could last beyond his lifetime. The boy who was once told he would never survive had now become a beacon of hope, proving that faith, persistence, and sacrifice could carry a person higher than the sky. The young man returned to his village after years of struggle, carrying not only the weight of his success, but also the countless dreams of those who had believed in him. The dusty paths where he once walked barefoot to school now glowed with the light of electricity. The fields where his father once labored with aching hands now moved with the hum of machines shaped from his ideas, and the children who had once studied under the moonlight now read their books in brightly lit rooms. As he walked through the crowd, the villagers gathered around with tears of pride, calling him not a distant celebrity, but their own son, who had carried their hopes into the sky and returned with reality. When he entered his home, he saw his mother, Seema Bibi, on the same old, sharp eye, her face older, her smile unchanged. He knelt at her feet and placed his head in her lap, telling her that the dream was never his alone, that it was hers, and now it belonged to everyone in the village. She touched his head with love and reminded him that true greatness was not in medals or fame, but in making life easier for others. Her words stayed in his heart like a prayer, and the young man realized that the dream he once thought was only about touching the sky had grown beyond the clouds, becoming a bridge between his struggle and the smiles of his people. That evening, he sat with the village children and shared stories of his hunger, his failures, his sleepless nights, showing them that nothing was impossible if they chose to believe. He told them that a dream could be higher than the sky only if they refused to surrender. The children listened with shining eyes, their laughter joining the wind that carried his words across the fields. As the sun set behind the mountains and the lamps he had built shone in every corner, the young man felt a peace deep